Alright, welcome back to the second part of the Nun from Limbo Miniatures video series by Big Dano Paints. Very exciting times. So this section of the video is going to run through the process that I've taken for painting the metallic parts for this model. And there's quite a variety of them. These thigh pads, I guess you might say, intricately detailed thigh pads, the stomach plates, I suppose, the choker around her neck choker, and a lot of weirdly positioned armor plates when you think about it, really. If I'm going to stab someone, I'm probably not going to aim for their thighs just quietly, but anyway, some cool shapes to work with. So in the first video in this series, I talked a little bit about how I have a tendency to make things up as I go. This armor is one of them, as is, I guess, the whole thing. I don't have a... Generally, it's very rare for me to have a fixed concept in mind. The first thing I do is grab out some colours I'm interested in painting with, and then just start seeing how they work together and experimenting from there. So in this particular instance with the armour, I start off looking for a metallic silver sort of feeling, but because of the initial concept of what I wanted the leotard to look like, I was thinking more of a purple for the leotard. The skin tone's got a little bit of purple in it, and so I started moving more towards a purple scheme for this non-metallic metal. And so in the very first video series I did, the Scar video, I talked through a lot of the concepts of non-metallic metal, but I'll run over them again very briefly. The first thing you have to do is break down various shapes into specific volumes, and sort of think about how those volumes would interact with a light source. Now, for the legs, these are very cylindrical in shape, and so the way that I've highlighted those legs is reflective of that cylindrical appearance. But with non-metallic metal, the positioning of the highlights does tend to change. You tend to get a much more sharp transition from light to dark, and you also tend to see some what we call bounce lights, which is where the actual light that's coming down will reflect off the surface itself and continue bouncing around various surfaces. So the shapes of the braces and the thigh plates, I don't know what. Someone tell me what these things are called. If anyone has an actual proper name for them, armor-wise, because I've just got no clue. The faces are quite interesting shapes, and probably fairly challenging for conceptually working out where the lights go. So the question I always come back to is where is your light source, and then thinking about ways that light would interact, particularly off a metal surface. And metal has this tendency to vary its reflective position based on the viewing angle. And so if you consider where you'll be predominantly viewing the model from, that will dictate usually where most of your lights and shadows should come from. So you can see I'm focusing most of the lights towards the front part of the face and of that metal plate. Even if you turn the model to the side to have a look from the side, that'll still ring relatively true based on the light source feeling like it's coming from the top and from the front. So this is a mixture of that previous two-color mix, which was Chalice Red and Charred Brown, and I've then mixed a Nocturna color called Orchid Light, which is a desaturated purple, sort of more lilac color. I really started to enjoy using that color. Actually, it's one of my new favorites. I like mixing it in and using it for highlights on various surfaces, just to see what happens. It's certainly different to sticking with a traditional cream or ivory color for highlights. And so this is at normal speed, this part of the video, and just wanted to, I guess, really highlight, painting pun, highlight the concepts and sort of the thought processes around why I've highlighted various sections and where I've positioned them. So you can see that shape there is a great example of highlighting the edges and also highlighting a section where the light would be reflecting, and leaving another little area there in some sort of shadow. So probably the best suggestion I can give, and again, this is sort of my method of painting non-metallic metal, and it's something that I continue to evolve, continue to experiment with. One of the things I always recommend is doing a lot of research, inspiration. There's a few ways you can approach getting inspiration, and one of those ways is looking at real life and pieces of photographs or what have you of actual examples of armor and how light reflects off armor. And in particular, there's a really cool Instagram page I follow which is called Armor Femme, and the armor is spelt ARMUR, femme as in femme fatale, and it's just pictures of chicks wearing armor, and sounds pretty corny, which I guess it probably is, but it's got some really cool photographs of ornate armor and interesting lighting situations, and you get to see the real life impact of various environments and what that does to metallic surfaces in terms of lighting, in terms of placements, and it's actually just a really cool site for inspiration purposes. I really enjoy that site. They don't post a lot of photos. Obviously, it's probably about as niche market as you can get, but really, really interesting light and stuff that you can put into your painting. So aside from photographs and real life examples, the next thing you can go to inspiration for is paintings. So traditional paintings, historical paintings, particularly non-metallic metal. Back in the era of some of the great masters of painting, micaceous pigment, metallic pigment didn't exist, and so those guys invented non-metallic metal, right? They invented painting a surface to look like metal, even though it was a canvas. So, looking at the way they choose to structure their lighting, the colors that they use can be really elucidating in terms of what you can bring back to a model and how to approach that. And one of the, I guess, lame things I did when I was in Europe last year with my girlfriend, we were visiting galleries and so forth, was anytime there was a cool piece of artwork that had some really nicely interestingly done non-metallic metal, I'd snap a quick photo of it. And she was always like, why are you taking a photo of that one? And after a while I explained it to her, and she was like, that is just probably the height of patheticness. So there you go. How good's miniature painting the hobby? But yeah, that's a really actually genuinely useful reference tool for looking at metal surfaces in art. And then the final place to search for inspiration is of course the miniature painting hobby. There's a number of people who do really interesting and clever non-metallic metal. Kirill Kanave does probably the most well-known and recognisable non-metallic metal that I think continues to push the boundaries of what we consider possible with non-metallic metals. But then you also have guys like Land Studio, who does a very unique and recognisable metallic effect. Mark Masklins, who uses more of an artistic non-metallic metal sort of vibe. There's lots of really incredible artists out there that do miniature painting and are really pushing the boundaries of not just non-metallic metal, but in this example of that, but also of what miniature art is about and can be about as we move forward. And I think really some of those guys would probably deserve the title artist as opposed to miniature artist, just based on the uniqueness of their approach. So as this surface continues to evolve and the color scheme continues, I am not really enjoying how it's coming out. The one of the challenges with metal is that very rarely does it look quite right until you do the very last lights, and that's actually what I'm doing here. About to do the really ivory pop lights with ivory. It doesn't ever really look like a metallic surface until you see these little sparkles of light. But even up till this point, I wasn't really digging the effect, and it goes back to something that I spoke about in my last video, which is contrast. So you need to be considerate of contrast, not just within individual volumes, but also across the model as a whole. And my issue with the leg doobies, more than anything else, is that they're existing on a very high value. And obviously this is something I would continue to work with this metal. This isn't a final stage, but you can already see that they're getting a little bit lost in the leg there. The appearance of them is not drawing focus towards those super cool legs, and letting your eye sort of travel around the model naturally. They're sort of fighting for attention, and so at this point I'm working with it and trying to make it feel right. And that what I'm doing right there is actually taking it out from underneath the light and viewing it under normal light to see if it changed my perspective on how I felt. It did not, FYI. And so again, I just sort of keep mucking around and putting out the lights and thinking about how I'm going to approach this. And again, this isn't a problem. And I've said that the way I approach this is it's a very iterative process. We try things and then see how they look, and if they don't work, we adjust and we refine and we continue to look at the piece as a whole, looking at each of the the various sections and how they interact with each other. And so for me, you can already get a really nice sense of what that upper section is going to look like. The very striking cross logo on the chest, contrasted by the black leotard. The face is really striking, particularly with the dark hair. But again, this color is just not quite working. So this is diving into a little bit of contrast talk, as always. One of the contrasts I like to consider a lot is cold-warm contrast, but I sort of approach that in a slightly different way. I tend to consider most of a model in an environment, and so I tend to have a lot of either warmth or cold on a model, and then I'll use very, very small aspects of that overall temperature. I'll add a few tiny areas where I use the opposite temperature to just cause a little bit of pop. And a good example of that is using a spot of red on the nose of what is otherwise a very cold dwarven skin tone. So here, even though we've got that skin that has a magenta color, the skin is actually relatively cold. But as I've said many times, nothing exists within a vacuum, and so the skin tone is being influenced by these armor plates, and it's giving the model quite a cold atmosphere. And so this is not something that I felt suited my vision, and there's a few reasons for that. One, there was a really cool version of this particular model done by Krzysztof Kovalchik, Red Av miniature painter, if you want to look him up on Instagram. That his technique, his style is really immaculate, lots of thin translucent layers, but it had a very cold feel. Even though there were some warm colors, it was very cold. So unless I'm doing a piece where I'm really looking to draw inspiration from another artist's work, or paying homage to something, I like to have an interpretation it's a little bit different to the other interpretations that have been already done. Sometimes that's not possible. If a model's been out in the market for a long time, there's a lot of versions. It's not easy to come up with a unique idea. But yeah. So this has now moved into speed times 2, and I've already made the decision that I'm going to change the color of the armor plates. And I'm going to use that through some glazes. But before I do that, I want to have all of the colors, all of the armor plates brought up to this same color, so that I'm able to transition them all across to the new color scheme as one, as a whole. So pretty easy to see. This is just a repetition of the same colors, same processes as before. And the way that I'm going to make these changes is firstly using contrast paints. Again, very useful as a filter to just change the tone of something a lot. But then also, the same method that I've showcased already, which is glazes over a contrasted high value color. So honestly, that is my technique in a nutshell. It is the way that I'm able to do things quickly. It's sketch and refine, sketch and refine, sketch and refine. So As you progress along the model, the sketching becomes less aggressive, a little bit more controlled. But again, it's just about tweak, and until you reach something you're happy with. So here I'm just filling in those straps on her legs with a darker color. They were just done in the Charlotte's red, so obviously I didn't want them to be that red color. I actually wanted them to be a brown, so just making them a little bit darker. Charred brown and Chimera black. So again, just popping the lights, really trying to, at this stage I think I am still, just contemplating how to change it, and what colours I could potentially go with. Sometimes if I'm painting a model and I have this feeling where I don't like something, I'll actually pick up the base and work on the base. And thanks to the magic of film editing, you're not going to see the base work in the order that I did it. But about 3/4 of the way through this video, I actually pick up the base and just start playing around with some colors on that, and that helped reinforce my decision around this armor, and that I wanted to change it to be something a little bit warmer. All right, so I'll go quiet now until we come up with something interesting to say. Vallejo model color, German grey, same color as the boots and that head bracer thing. And Charlotte's red and charred brown, same as the. Actually, that was I'd run out of Charlotte's red on my palette, so that's actually Nocturna crimson and a little bit of charred brown, mostly because it was on the palette, so easy. For this video, at the moment, I have not set up a palette camera. I am working on that, mechanically speaking, how I'm going to make that work, because I think it's probably just as valuable to observe as this. I have a tendency to really just pull little bits and pieces of color from various sections on my palette. So, even if I'm doing the hair and I've got the hair base color, I might just grab a little bit of Charlotte's red into the color just to help unify it. Very subtle, just working with the colors that I have on the palette and being very, very harmonious in bringing them all together. Love a good model shot of model just sitting on the desk with some artistically placed paintbrushes in the background. Really worthwhile stuff. Now actually what I'm doing here is pulling out. I think I'm pulling out contrast paints. I hope I am. This was done on the weekend, just now, several days later. So I'm grabbing out contrast paints and I'm looking at something I can use to warm up that armor. So the colors I go for is Gore Grunter Fur and Shyish Purple, which are both pretty dark colors, and also a little bit against each other. The Shyish Purple is a cold color, and the Gore Grunter Fur is a warm color. So I mixed them together, diluted them with Magic Mix quite a lot, Oh no, here we go, doing a bit of white first. Excellent. I definitely did get those contrast paints out though. So this is, we'll come back to that, those two colours that I did on the armour when I actually do it. Good opportunity to talk about white while we wait for the Magic of Contrast paints. White is a colour that a lot of people have challenges painting for a few reasons. I think it's very hard to make white look white and not look like cream or other, dark grey or light grey. Sorry, but I think the trick with painting white to look like white is recognizing that white, being a very light color, is extremely reflective of other colors around it, and so it's important to actually put a lot of other colors into the white for it to look and feel like white. The trick is having just a few very, very strong areas of pure white, and in those strong areas doing a lot of thin layers, but having the rest actually be a grey, a colour similar to the pink or magenta or skin tone, so doing white, particularly if you've used an airbrush or if you've used some washes, doing a white over that grey is actually really, really easy, and leaving the other colours that have accumulated on that undercoat sort of showing through works surprisingly well at replicating white. So we'll come back to that. Oh, here we go. Contrast, as we talked about. Magnificent. Well done, Deno. Well-oiled machine. This video series, absolutely well-oiled machine. So here we go. This is the first attempt with the contrast color. You can see I'm still relatively cold at this stage. The contrast is more tending towards that chayish purple, and sticking with a cold color, which has helped to separate it from the skin tone. Helped a fair bit, but it for whatever reason I wasn't digging it. So here I'm just using the hairdryer to dry the contrast paint. Best tool in the arsenal, the hairdryer. Absolutely couldn't live without it. So even though that contrast paint, that filter, has really helped separate the two, particularly from a value perspective, I'm still not really feeling that cold color. So I keep going back into the white here again. That's Chimera white. It's quite a thin white, but strongly pigmented. But you can also see I'm being a little bit more precise in where I place this white. I'm not doing it all over, because again, I want to leave some of that, some of those grey tones, some of those other tones from the other areas of the model that have accumulated to be there, reinforcing not only the light, because you have to have light and dark, you have to have shadow contrast, and white, obviously it's very hard to shade white, so your shadows need to be that grey colour, but they also need to have the similar colours and tones of what else is happening around the model. But for me, the key to doing white is just a lot of layers, over and over and over, repetition, focusing on the areas where the light would accumulate. You can see the those folds in the cloak up there are pretty apparent still with the grey. There's a part underneath the breasts where there's still a lot of the grey. Towards the lower section of the leotard, there is still more of that grey colour. So One thing I will do later on is actually go over this with a glaze of some of the other colours that are around the model to help unify it before going back in with more white. So it's probably, white and black are probably the two of the hardest colours in the spectrum of colours to paint because of the fact that you need to have enough contrast for them to be visually interesting. But if you have too much contrast or you contrast in the wrong way, black looks like grey and white looks like grey. So tricky challenge. Good fun though. Chimera white is really good for this. It is probably the only weakness of it is thin, very, very thin. And I find that to be a strength, but also a weakness. All of the Chimera colours very thin, very dilute. But because of that, sometimes you want to use a thick colour, and it's very hard to do that when your colour is already ultra thin. So, gonna do some hair highlighting here, and I did a little bit of talk on hair in the scar video, and this is obviously not a lot of hair here to draw the attention of the model, and in many ways I want to stick with a dark colour, just again keeping the face very, very considered central focus. So I've started with an orange brown, glazed in some dark colours, and now going back with the orange brown. This is actually probably the decision that I made to go to a warmer scheme, as I really liked how this warmer colour worked alongside the skin tone. So maybe this was the moment when I made that decision. This is easy hair to paint because it's got clumps. So you focus on your clumps. It's got clear areas where the light would hit. So after you finish doing your clumps, you move into thinner strokes focused on the light areas, and then you do final reflective highlights. So pretty easy hair to paint. But as always, it's very hard to assess when something's finished or not finished, with other areas surrounding it not being completed. So this is exciting. I don't know what's going to come next. What are we going to do next, Deno? Surprise us. Do something, son. Oh yes, this little headband thing. Cool. So this is a fun shape to actually do non-metallic metal on, because it's really easy, and you get to start working with micro textures and thinking about the direction of your strokes with your brush. So when you have a polished burnished metal, you see the those lights coming through, very, very thin lines. So using the actual brush, and as you can see the direction of the brush here, to create lots and lots of little thin strokes, helps replicate that feeling of that slightly burnished metal, which is really, really cool. And if you take that to the fullest extremes and continue to use those strokes, and get your placement of your lights right, and think about that the bouncing light and the viewing angle and where someone's going to be looking at it from, really, really easy to make this sort of shape, this sort of object, look like a convincing piece of metal. You can see that I was searching here for something else, as the metal on the leg doobies is not really working. So I was thinking about switching to a more traditional granite steely colour. But as you'll see, this does not... Oh, what's happening here with the focus? Get it together, Deno. Come on, son. There we go. So, yeah, you'll see that, although I sort of run with this idea for a little while, again, just don't feel like it works. So we'll see this changing, but again, the technique and in particular the importance of the brush strokes here is probably the takeaway from this section. You can see those sideways strokes. That's a pretty rough line, again, because I am just using the sketch and refine technique where I'm thinking about where I want the light and sketching that in before I go in and do some more glazing and smoothing and tweaking those colours. So. And there's the glazing. So I'm at this point I'm making a cardinal mistake that I talk about I talked about in the Scar video, which is doing metal in isolation. There should be brown tones and skin tones and other tones on there, but that's something that you can add after working through the metal colors, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. You're seeing me add the purples, the other colors, and then deciding that the whole thing is not working and I need to go somewhere else. Exciting. So this has been 37 minutes of video showcasing something that I haven't used at all pretty much on the final model, which is a cool usage of the time that I've invested. But I think it's important, very important, to recognize that mistakes are often the best thing that happens in painting. Without making mistakes, you don't learn why things don't work, and you don't learn to correct them. In one of my favourite ever inspirational quotes, "Why do we fall down, Bruce?" Batman Begins. It's so we can learn to pick ourselves up again, and I think that's just a great all-round life lesson, and it is. It's only through falling down and making mistakes and doing things incorrectly that we learn how to correct those challenges and evolve and grow and create new neural pathways. And what will help you in the long run is understanding why you made those mistakes. And mistakes, I've said, are the best thing that can happen to you as a painter. So what you're seeing here is me making the call that I'm going to go in and glaze some more colours into the metal. And so I'm going back in with the ivory and putting the lights back in before I go in with more colours. Just before I do that glazing though, that little headband thing, you can see how that would be a relatively convincing metallic effect if I continued working with those same light areas, which is pretty cool. Great quote from Batman. Fantastic. Oh, going back in and doing some of the lights on the hair. good to see. I like to stick through and follow through with one thing that I'm working on at a time. It's very helpful for my narration of this video. Outstanding. But as I said before, base coat, work on clumps, then smaller light reflections, and finally bright lights is the way to do hair. Very, very easy. I'll talk probably more on hair when I go to a bust that has some nicer hair volumes. But this is a very simplistic hair sculpt, which is great. It's very easy to get it looking relatively good. Evidently, I've decided to paint the eyes here, which is cool. So cue probably 17 attempts of these eyes. They're very small. There's probably one of my biggest challenges as a painter is because I like really getting stuck in and doing things. On occasion, I don't always do the best cleanup of models in terms of the removing of mold lines in specific locations. I usually get the really important ones, but there'll on occasion be one or two that I miss. Where I also get frustrated is if there's a mold line in a really unfortunate spot, and actually her right eyelid left from our position has actually got a tiny little mold line on it, which I really wish I had have removed, but I don't even think I saw that one, so hard to be critical. If you look at her left eye and in the close-up photos of the finished model, you'll see the left eye is really quite nicely done in terms of the sculpt as well as the way that I've painted it, whereas the right-hand eye, left from viewing angle that we've got, the sculpt's just ever so slightly askew, so it makes it hard. Here we go with the next example of the non-metallic metal that I don't like, which is very helpful. This is actually a really good object though for explaining light on round surfaces, and I'll give you a red hot tip here. If you want to look at how light reflects off round surfaces, go and look at Captain America's shield in many and varied promotional posters. You get to see that bounce effect. You get to see the way that the light interacts with an angled surface. It's actually a really cool reference piece. But what I'm doing here is I'm focusing the light on two areas, which is the top left. Again, as I talked about in the first video, light is coming from the top left, and then on the bottom right, which is consistent with the angle of the light direction. I'm also focusing it on the edges that would be catching the light, and also thinking a little bit about where light is going to rebound more and more. So this is an odd object, and it looks like it would be difficult to get right, but actually this was probably the easiest part of the model to paint, and looks really the most convincing metal on the whole piece. So, and that's because of the shape of the object. Piece of cake. Some cool little fleur-de-lis there on her weapon. Very impractical weapon. I'm not sure what she's going to do with that. Goes with the impractical thigh guards, I suppose, doesn't it? So again, I'll just quickly run through those colours again. That was Orchid Light mixed in with the Chalice Red and Shard Brown, and all the way up to Orchid Light, and finally Ivory for the last lights. Cool. So I think the conceptually how I've approached painting the metals is what this video has been focused on, but the actual end result ends up being quite different to what this looks like right now, and I'll be interested to see if people prefer this cold purpley sort of look, which obviously wasn't refined at all, but or if people end up preferring the more warm coppery color that I end up going with. So this is at ×2 speed, in case you couldn't tell from the rapidity of the brush strokes there. Alright, so I do, as always, shout out socials. Feel free to send some feedback about the videos, what you would like to see. Also, feel free to not send anything. I don't really mind either way. I much prefer people just enjoying what they want to enjoy. So let's all be friends. Let's all be nice to each other. That'd be great. We're all in this together. It's a crazy time. Do you know, I have to say, I did think, oh, here we go. That's me using that very, very thin dilute glaze I was talking about earlier on the white. It's actually the same color as I used on the the thigh guards and the armor, which is Shoyish purple and Gore-Grunta red, Gore-Grunta fur, sorry. So yeah, you can see the effect of that a little bit later on as we get closer. All right, the last minute and a half of the video, we actually get to see the transition into a bronze color. This is mostly Gore-Grunta red, Gore-Grunta fur, significantly less purple than before. I think I actually throw a little bit of volupus pink in there too. Really want to warm it up and make it completely different. It's still actually quite dilute with the medium in there, but you can see just with the actual strength of the pigment how much it is filtering that color. And we've gone from a cold purple to a warm coppery bronze already, and that's just the first step. That's very exciting. That makes me excited for the next video, which will happen in approximately 1 minute, and whenever I've finished editing it and uploading it to YouTube. But yeah, just holistically speaking, never be afraid to make a wholesale change to a piece. There's very little you can do to a model that will be irreparable, and you always want to try something. Just try it, because I think you regret not trying it more, because ultimately the worst thing that you can do is not enjoy it, and if you don't enjoy it, you can always change it back. So be brave and be prepared to make changes to the work that you've done. All right, that is the end of video 2. Video 3 will be the finishing touches, and that is it. Thank you.